Kethavar pressed his three-fingered hand against the viewing port of the research vessel Luminous Dawn. The blue and green planet below looked peaceful from this distance. White clouds swirled across the surface like cotton candy. The humans called it Earth, and it was supposed to be a routine survey mission. "Beautiful world," said Commander Zeftos, joining Kethavar at the observation deck. The commander's silver skin gleamed under the ship's soft lighting. "The reports say they have barely reached their own moon. Primitive rockets, basic computers. Should be a simple cataloging mission." Kethavar nodded and pulled up the data on his portable screen. The Galactic Confederation had been watching humanity for 47 years. They were listed as a Class C species, showing promise but still centuries away from true space travel. The humans had split atoms, built simple computers, and sent a few brave souls to their moon. It was all very normal for a developing species. "Their population is interesting," Kethavar said, scrolling through the information. "Over 7 billion individuals. They have many different languages, countries, and cultures. Most species unite under one government by this stage, but humans seem to enjoy disagreeing with each other." Commander Zeftos made a sound that was similar to laughter in his species. "Yes, their wars are well documented. Quite violent for such a young civilization, though the reports say they have been more peaceful recently." The ship's communication officer, a tall being with blue skin named Veltar, approached them with a confused expression. "Commander, we are receiving unusual readings from the system." "What kind of readings?" Zeftos asked. Veltar's large eyes blinked twice. "There appears to be a massive object on a collision course with the human homeworld. Our computers are still calculating the size, but initial scans suggest it is approximately 1,200 kilometers in diameter." Kethavar felt his heart skip a beat. 1,200 kilometers? That would be an extinction event, Commander Zeftos finished grimly. "Show me the tactical display." They moved to the bridge where a large hologram appeared in the center of the room. The solar system spread out before them in miniature. Earth glowed softly in its orbital position, but approaching from the outer system was a dark, irregular shape. Numbers and calculations flowed around the asteroid in glowing text. "Impact in 71 hours and 43 minutes, announced the ship's computer in its calm, mechanical voice. "Collision probability, 99.7%. Expected result, complete sterilization of planetary surface." Silence filled the bridge. Kethavar had seen this happen before to other worlds. Usually a species had some warning, months or years to prepare. They would evacuate what population they could to other planets or accept their fate with dignity. It was always tragic, but it was part of the natural cycle of the universe. "What are the humans doing?" asked Veltar. "Are they evacuating?" Kethavar quickly accessed Earth's communication networks. The humans had basic satellite technology, so intercepting their messages was simple. What he found made him pause in confusion. "Commander," he said slowly, "they are not evacuating." "What do you mean?" Zeftos moved closer to look at the data. "Their global communication networks are active. They appear to be organizing something." Kethavar's voice grew more puzzled as he read through the intercepted messages. "They have activated what they call emergency protocols. Every space agency on the planet is working together. They are preparing to launch spacecraft." Commander Zeftos studied the readings. "Perhaps they plan to evacuate their leaders or important individuals?" Kethavar shook his head. "No, Commander. They are loading the spacecraft with nuclear weapons." The bridge fell silent again. Nuclear weapons were common enough among young species, but using them in space was unusual and generally ineffective. "They cannot possibly believe they can destroy an asteroid of that size with primitive nuclear devices," said Veltar. "Our computers show they would need weapons thousands of times more powerful." "Perhaps they do not understand the mathematics," suggested the commander. "Their science may not be advanced enough to calculate the true scope of the problem." But Kethavar was studying more of their communications. He found scientific papers, calculations, and detailed plans flowing between universities, space agencies, and military organizations across the planet. The humans knew exactly how big the asteroid was. They understood the odds perfectly. "Commander, I believe they do understand," Kethavar said quietly. "They know their chances are almost zero. Then why are they not evacuating?" "Where would they go?" asked Veltar. Kethavar looked up from his screen. "They have nowhere to go. They have barely reached their own moon. They have no colonies, no ships capable of interstellar travel. This planet is all they have." The reality of the situation settled over the bridge crew. Most species that faced extinction events had at least some options. They could flee to established colonies or call for help from galactic neighbors. But humanity was alone in their corner of space. They had no friends among the stars, no backup planets, no way to escape their solar system. So they choose to fight, Commander Zeftos said with what might have been respect in his voice. Over the next several hours, the crew of the Luminous Dawn watched in fascination as Earth transformed before their eyes. Cities that had been dark now blazed with activity. Factories that built cars and computers suddenly started producing rocket parts. Ships and aircraft moved across the planet carrying equipment and people. The humans worked with a speed that impressed even the advanced aliens. In less than 24 hours, they had converted their entire civilization into a single, massive war machine aimed at the approaching asteroid. "Look at this," Veltar said, highlighting communication channels on the main display. "They are broadcasting constantly. Music, messages, videos. It is like they are trying to capture everything they are before they die trying," Kethavar finished. The xenobiologist found himself drawn to the human broadcasts. Children sang songs for their parents who were working at launch sites. Couples got married in quick ceremonies before one partner left to join the mission. Old people shared stories and wisdom, knowing they might be the last generation to remember certain things. But what struck Kethavar most was the complete absence of panic. There was sadness, yes, and fear, but underneath it all was something he had never seen in a species facing extinction: determination. "Commander," Kethavar said, "I recommend we maintain position and observe. This situation is unprecedented in Confederation records." Commander Zeftos nodded slowly. "Agreed. We are about to witness either the most foolish or most courageous act in galactic history." As the first human rockets began launching toward the asteroid, trailing fire across Earth's sky, Kethavar realized they were probably about to witness both. The first wave of human spacecraft launched 6 hours after the Luminous Dawn arrived in the system. Kethavar watched from the observation deck as dozens of bright spots lifted off from Earth's surface, leaving glowing trails behind them like falling stars in reverse. "Primitive but effective propulsion," noted Veltar, studying the engine signatures. "Chemical rockets. Very inefficient, but they appear functional." Commander Zeftos stood beside them, his expression unreadable. "How many vessels in this first wave?" Kethavar checked his readings. 47 spacecraft, Commander. Each one carries multiple nuclear devices. The humans call them packages. Based on their communications, each package contains their most powerful weapons. And the crews? Each ship carries between 3 and 8 humans. Kethavar paused, then added quietly, "None of these ships are designed to return to Earth." The silence that followed was heavy. In Confederation space, suicide missions were almost unheard of. Most species valued individual life too highly to send their people on missions with no hope of return. When faced with impossible odds, they typically chose evacuation or surrender, but the humans were different. "Listen to this," Veltar said, patching an audio transmission through the bridge speakers. The voice was female, speaking in what their computers identified as English. "Houston, this is Eagle 7. We are go for final approach. Tell my kids I love them and tell them Mommy is going to kick this rock's ass. Eagle 7 out." The transmission ended with what sounded like laughter from the ground control team. Kethavar found himself disturbed by the casual tone. "She sounds almost happy." "Perhaps they do not truly understand they will die," suggested Veltar. But Kethavar had been studying human communications for hours now. The messages between crew members and their families made it clear that everyone understood exactly what was happening. They knew these were one-way trips. They knew the odds of success were almost zero. And yet, the dominant emotion in their communications was not despair but determination. The asteroid filled the main display now, a dark, ugly chunk of rock and metal hurtling through space. It was scarred with craters and covered in what appeared to be ice. The Confederation's computers had finished their analysis. The object massed approximately 2 trillion tons and was moving at nearly 30 kilometers per second. The humans would need to change the asteroid's velocity by at least 0.003% to avoid impact, the ship's computer announced. Current human nuclear weapons are insufficient by a factor of approximately 8,000. 8,000, repeated Commander Zeftos. They would need 8,000 times more explosive power. Do they know this? Asked Veltar. Kethavar accessed more human communications. He found detailed scientific papers, calculations from their best universities, and reports from their space agencies. Yes, they know. Their scientists have run the same calculations we have. Then this is madness, Veltar said. But Kethavar was not so sure. As he studied the human plan more carefully, he began to see something the computers had missed. The humans were not trying to destroy the asteroid with brute force. They were trying to change its structure. Commander, look at this, he said, highlighting the targeting data. They are not aiming for random points on the asteroid. They have identified what they call stress fractures and weak points in the rock. The display showed the asteroid in detail, with dozens of red markers scattered across its surface. Each marker corresponded to a human target. They believe they can break it apart, Commander Zeftos said with surprise. Not break it apart, Kethavar corrected, studying more data. They want to change how it spins. If they can alter the rotation even slightly, it might change the trajectory enough to miss Earth. It was still nearly impossible, but it was not completely insane. The humans had found the one approach that gave them any chance at all, however small. The first nuclear explosions began lighting up space around the asteroid. From the distance of the luminous dawn, they looked like tiny camera flashes against the dark rock. The ship's sensors recorded each blast, measuring the energy output and impact. First wave impacts complete, announced the computer. Asteroid velocity change, negligible. Trajectory unchanged, but the human spacecraft kept coming. Even as the first wave detonated uselessly against the massive rock, the second wave was already halfway to their target. And behind them, more rockets were launching from Earth. How many waves are they planning? Asked Veltar. Kethavar checked the launch schedules the humans were broadcasting openly. 17 waves over the next 60 hours. After that, they will be out of rockets. And if the first 16 fail, then the 17th wave will try something different. Kethavar found the final mission plans and displayed them. The last group is not carrying nuclear weapons. They are carrying what the humans call kinetic impactors. Commander Zeftos studied the data. They plan to ram the asteroid directly? Yes, Commander. If the explosives fail, they will try to hit it with their spacecraft. The idea was so desperate it almost seemed ridiculous. The entire mass of a human spacecraft was nothing compared to the asteroid. It would be like trying to stop a falling mountain by throwing pebbles at it. But as Kethavar watched the second wave of explosions bloom against the asteroid's surface, he realized something important. The humans were not just throwing everything they had at the problem and hoping for the best. Each wave was learning from the previous one. Look at the targeting pattern for Wave 2, he said, highlighting the new impact points. They adjusted their aim based on the results from Wave 1. Adaptive tactics, Commander Zeftos observed. They are using each mission to gather data for the next. The human ground control channels were full of chatter as scientists analyzed each explosion, calculated new approach vectors, and refined their plans. Even as their people died in space, they were learning, adapting, improving. Wave 2 impacts complete, the computer announced. Asteroid velocity change 0.0001%. Trajectory unchanged, it was still nothing. The asteroid continued its deadly approach toward Earth. But Kethavar noticed something in the sensor data that the computer had missed. The explosions were having a cumulative effect on the asteroid's structure. Tiny cracks were spreading through the rock. Internal stress patterns were shifting. The humans could not destroy the asteroid and they probably could not deflect it. But they might be able to damage it enough to change what happened when it hit Earth. Commander, Kethavar said slowly, I do not think they are trying to save their world anymore. What do you mean? Kethavar pointed to the latest targeting data. Look at where the remaining waves are aimed. They are trying to break the asteroid into smaller pieces. If they cannot stop it from hitting Earth, they want to make sure it hits as many small impacts instead of one large one. Commander Zeftos studied the display. That might actually work. Many small impacts would still be devastating, but not necessarily extinction level. It would still kill millions of humans, Veltar said quietly. But not all of them, Kethavar replied. They are choosing to save part of their species rather than lose everything. As the third wave of human spacecraft approached the asteroid, Kethavar found himself filled with an emotion he could not name. These beings faced certain doom with clear eyes and steady hands. They did not rage against fate or beg the universe for mercy. They simply rolled up their sleeves and went to work. Even if they failed, even if Earth died, the humans would die fighting. By the time the fifth wave of human spacecraft reached the asteroid, something unexpected began to happen. The massive rock was starting to show signs of damage. HFY stared at the sensor readings, checking them 3 times to make sure they were accurate. "Commander, the asteroid's rotation is changing." Commander HFY moved quickly to the main display. "Show me the details." The hologram updated to show the asteroid's movement through space. Red lines traced its original path, while blue lines showed the current trajectory. The difference was tiny, but it was real. 0.002% change in rotational velocity, the ship's computer announced. Trajectory shift, negligible but measurable. "They are actually doing something," Veltar whispered in amazement. But HFY was focused on something else. The human communications had changed. Instead of the grim determination from the first few waves, now there was something that sounded almost like excitement. "Listen to this transmission," he said, playing an audio message from the 6th wave commander. "Ground control. This is Hammer 6. We can see the cracks from here. That son of a bitch is starting to come apart. Adjusting approach angle to hit the biggest fracture line. Tell the folks back home we might actually pull this crazy thing off." The optimism in the voice was startling. Any rational species would look at the numbers and see that the changes were still far too small to matter. Earth still faced certain destruction, but the humans seemed to draw hope from the smallest signs of progress. "How can they be so positive?" asked Veltar. "The trajectory change is meaningless. They would need 1,000 times more effect to actually save their planet." HFY had been studying human psychology files from their long-range observations. "I believe it is because they are making progress at all. Most species would have given up by now when they saw how little each attack accomplished, but humans seem to view any progress as proof that more progress is possible." The asteroid now looked different than when the attacks began. Bright scars marked impact points across its surface. Some of the nuclear explosions had blown chunks of rock into space, creating small debris clouds. The largest crater was nearly 1 kilometer wide. "Structural analysis shows significant internal damage," the computer reported. "Multiple fracture networks detected. However, total mass reduction is less than 0.1%. Commander HFY studied the display thoughtfully. "The humans are not trying to reduce mass anymore, are they?" HFY shook his head. "No, Commander. Look at the targeting pattern for waves 7 through 10. They are specifically hitting points where the fractures intersect. They are trying to create a cascade failure." "Cascade failure?" "They want to break the asteroid apart from the inside. If they can create enough internal stress, the whole structure might collapse into smaller pieces." It was still a desperate plan with almost no chance of success. The asteroid was held together by millions of years of gravitational compression and mineral bonding. But HFY was beginning to understand that humans specialized in attempting the impossible. The 7th wave achieved something remarkable. When their nuclear weapons detonated deep in the largest crater, the explosion triggered exactly what the humans had hoped for. A massive section of the asteroid's surface broke away and tumbled into space. "Mass reduction, 0.7%, the computer announced. Trajectory change, 0.013%. For the first time since the crisis began, the numbers were starting to look meaningful. The asteroid's path was shifting enough that sensors could detect it without careful measurement. "They did it," Veltar said in disbelief. "They actually damaged something that large." But HFY was listening to human communications again, and what he heard worried him. "Commander, the humans are changing their plan again." "How so?" "The remaining waves are not enough to achieve the cascade failure they wanted, so they are trying something else." HFY displayed new data on the screen. "They are going to ram their space station into the asteroid." The 3 aliens stared at the information in shock. The human space station was their largest. Structure in orbit around Earth had housed over 10,000 people and represented decades of work and resources. "That is their primary orbital facility," Commander HFY said. "Destroying it would set their space program back generations. If they survive at all," Veltar added. But the humans were already moving forward with the plan. Communications traffic showed massive evacuation efforts as ships ferried people down from the station to Earth. At the same time, engineers were modifying the station's structure and loading it with every piece of heavy equipment they could find. HFY accessed the evacuation records. They are removing most of the population, but not all. Several hundred humans are volunteering to stay behind and pilot the station manually. Pilot it? Why not use automation? Their computers are not advanced enough for such a complex maneuver. They need human pilots to guide the station into the exact right impact point. The implications were staggering. The humans were willing to sacrifice their most important space asset and hundreds of lives for a chance to save their species. And they were doing it based on calculations that still showed less than a 1% probability of success. Over the next 12 hours, the crew of the Luminous Dawn watched one of the most remarkable displays of courage they had ever witnessed. The human space station slowly changed course, moving away from Earth's orbit toward an intercept path with the asteroid. The communications from the station were heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time. Kethvar listened to messages between the volunteer crew and their families on Earth. Children drew pictures for parents they would never see again. Spouses said goodbye over video calls, but every message ended the same way, with hope that the sacrifice would matter. Station Commander Sarah Chen to ground control came one transmission that Kethvar found particularly moving. "Tell my daughter that Mommy loves her and that we are going to make sure she has a future. Tell her that sometimes people have to do scary things to protect the people they love." The woman's voice was steady and calm, as if she were discussing dinner plans instead of her own death. "How do they maintain such composure?" asked Veltar. Kethvar had been wondering the same thing. "I believe it is because they focus on the goal rather than the cost. They are not thinking about dying. They are thinking about succeeding." The space station's final approach took 6 hours. During that time, the remaining nuclear waves continued their attacks on the asteroid, following the new plan to create the largest possible impact crater for the station to hit. When the station finally struck the asteroid, the explosion was visible from Earth without telescopes. The impact released energy equivalent to several hundred nuclear weapons detonating simultaneously. "Massive structural failure detected," the computer announced. "Asteroid breaking apart into multiple fragments. Largest fragment now represents approximately 60% of original mass." The main display showed the asteroid splitting like a piece of fruit, chunks of rock ranging from mountain size to city size spread out along the original trajectory. Some pieces were thrown completely clear of the impact path. "Trajectory analysis complete," the computer continued. "Multiple impacts projected across Earth's surface. Total destructive potential reduced by approximately 40%. It was still going to be devastating. Cities would be destroyed, millions would die, and human civilization would be set back centuries. But it would not be the end of everything. Commander Zeftos turned to Kethvar. "They did it. They actually changed the outcome." Kethvar nodded, but he was troubled by something else he saw in the data. "Commander, look at the impact projections. The largest fragment is still heading directly for Earth's most populated continent. Even after everything they had sacrificed, the humans still faced a continent-killing impact that would destroy most of their civilization." But as Kethvar listened to the communications from Earth, he heard no despair. Instead, he heard people already making plans for what came next. With 18 hours remaining before impact, the humans made a decision that shocked even the experienced crew of the Luminous Dawn. "Commander, you need to see this," Kethvar said, his voice tight with disbelief. He displayed the latest human communications on the main screen. Commander Zeftos read the data, then read it again. "This cannot be accurate. They are planning to evacuate their entire population to the southern hemisphere." "Not evacuate, Commander. They are asking people to move voluntarily, and millions are actually doing it." The scope of what was happening on Earth was almost beyond comprehension. In less than a day, the largest mass migration in human history had begun. Cars, trains, ships, and aircraft moved in continuous streams as people fled from the projected impact zones. But that was not what had shocked Kethvar. "Look at who is staying behind," he said, highlighting specific data points. Veltar studied the information. Medical personnel, engineers, emergency responders. They are keeping essential services running in the impact zones. "For what purpose?" asked Commander Zeftos. "Those areas will be completely destroyed." Kethvar had been analyzing human communications for hours, trying to understand their reasoning. "They are maintaining infrastructure for the evacuation. Someone has to keep the power plants running, the transportation systems working, the hospitals operating. Without those services, the evacuation would fail. But anyone who stays behind will die when the asteroid hits." "Yes. And they know this. The three aliens stood in silence, trying to process what they were witnessing. Millions of humans were volunteering to remain in certain death zones to help others escape. It went against every survival instinct that evolution had programmed into intelligent life. "How many?" asked Commander Zeftos quietly. "Approximately 40 million humans have volunteered to stay in the impact zones to support evacuation efforts," Kethvar replied. "They call themselves the Last Shift." The communications from these volunteers were unlike anything in Galactic Confederation records. Instead of despair or terror, the messages were filled with practical concerns about maintaining equipment and coordinating logistics. "This is Dr. Martinez at Chicago General," came one transmission that Kethvar played for the others. "We will maintain emergency services until the last evacuation transport leaves the area. Current estimate is 16 hours. We have sufficient medical supplies and personnel. Tell my family I love them, and tell them this is important work." The calm professionalism in the voice was unsettling. These humans were discussing their own deaths, as if they were planning a work schedule. "Perhaps they do not truly understand what will happen," suggested Veltar. But Kethvar had studied their scientific data. The humans knew exactly what the impact would do. Their models showed temperatures reaching thousands of degrees, shockwaves that would level mountains, and fires that would burn for months. "Nothing in the impact zones would survive. They understand perfectly," he said. "That is what makes this so remarkable." Over the next few hours, the crew of the Luminous Dawn watched the evacuation unfold with growing amazement. The humans had turned their entire civilization into a single, coordinated rescue operation. Every vehicle that could move was pressed into service. Every road, railway, and waterway became part of the evacuation network, and at the center of it all were the volunteers who stayed behind to make it work. "Look at this efficiency," Veltar observed, studying the movement patterns. "They are evacuating nearly 2 billion people in less than 20 hours. The logistics are incredible. It should be impossible," Commander Zeftos agreed. "No species has ever attempted population movement on this scale. But the humans were not just moving people randomly. They had calculated optimal evacuation routes, established supply chains for food and fuel, and created communication networks to coordinate the massive operation. Most impressive of all, they were doing it while maintaining order and preventing panic. Listen to their public broadcasts," Kethvar said, patching audio through the bridge speakers. "This is Emergency Broadcast Station 7. Traffic on Highway 95 is moving well. Estimated travel time to the safe zone is 6 hours. Please remain calm, help your neighbors, and remember that we are all in this together. For those staying behind to help with the evacuation, your families want you to know how proud they are." The tone was steady, reassuring, almost peaceful. These people were facing the end of their world with dignity and grace. But Kethvar was troubled by something else he had discovered in the data. "Commander, the evacuation will not save everyone. Even if they move 2 billion people, the secondary effects will still kill millions more." "Secondary effects?" "The impact will trigger earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions around the planet. The dust cloud will block sunlight for months. Even in the safe zones, many will not survive the aftermath." Commander Zeftos studied the projected casualty figures. "They know this?" "Yes. Their scientists have calculated that best-case scenario they might save half their population." "And worst case?" 10% survival rate." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans were sacrificing everything they had for a 10% chance that some of their species would survive. It was the longest of long odds, but they were taking it. "Why?" asked Veltar. "Why not evacuate their leaders and scientists to other planets? Surely some other species would take in refugees." Kethvar had wondered the same thing, but the answer was simple. "They have no way to contact other species. As far as they know, they are alone in the universe. This planet is all they have." With 6 hours remaining before impact, the evacuation entered its final phase. The last transport ships lifted off from the impact zones, carrying the final groups of refugees to safety. But many of the volunteers who had made the evacuation possible remained behind. Kethvar monitored their communications as they prepared for the end. Doctors secured medical equipment for future recovery teams. Engineers shut down power plants safely to prevent additional explosions. Teachers recorded final lessons for children who would have to rebuild civilization. "Attention all last shift personnel. came a broadcast from what appeared to be a senior coordinator. The evacuation phase is complete. You have saved over 2 billion lives today. The next phase begins in 5 hours. For those who can still leave, transport is available. For those staying for Phase 2, we salute you. Phase 2? Asked Commander Zeftos. Kethvar checked the latest data. Some of them are not just waiting for the impact, Commander. They are planning to work right up until the end. Work on what? Data preservation, equipment protection, message recording. They want to leave as much information as possible for the survivors. They are trying to save their civilization's knowledge. Even facing certain death, the humans were still thinking about the future. They were still working to give their species the best possible chance of recovery. As the asteroid fragments blazed across Earth's sky like falling stars, Kethvar realized he was witnessing something that would change how the galaxy understood courage forever. The first fragment hit Earth's Pacific Ocean with the force of 1 million nuclear weapons. From the bridge of the luminous dawn, the crew watched in silence as a pillar of fire and steam rose into the atmosphere. The shock waves spread across the planet's surface like ripples in a pond. Impact 1 complete, the ship's computer announced in its emotionless voice. Energy release 8.7 megatons equivalent. Secondary impacts in progress. Kethvar could not look away from the display. Across Earth's surface, bright flashes marked where smaller fragments struck land and sea. Each flash represented destruction beyond anything most species had ever experienced. Cities vanished in seconds. Forests became blazing wastelands. Mountains were leveled flat. The largest fragment is approaching the North American continent, Beltar reported, his voice barely above a whisper. Commander Zeftos stood rigid beside the main display. The evacuation zones? Clear, Commander. The humans successfully moved everyone out of the primary impact area. The final impact lit up the entire continent. The fragment struck what the humans called the Great Plains with enough force to create a crater 50 kilometers wide. The explosion could be seen from space as a brilliant white dome that expanded outward like a growing bubble. Energy release, 400 megatons, the computer reported. Surface temperature at impact site 15,000 degrees. Shockwave propagation speed, Mach 12. Everything within 300 kilometers of the impact site was instantly vaporized. The shockwave flattened everything for another 500 kilometers beyond that. But beyond the zone of total destruction, in shelters and underground facilities, millions of humans waited in the darkness. Seismic activity detected globally, the computer continued. Volcanic eruptions on 4 continents. Tsunami generation in 3 ocean basins. Atmospheric dust concentration increasing rapidly. The planet that had been blue and green when they arrived was now brown and gray. Massive clouds of dust and debris rose into the atmosphere, beginning to block out the sun. It would be months before clear skies returned to Earth. Casualty estimates? Asked Commander Zeftos. Kethvar consulted the data flowing from their sensors. Approximately 4.2 billion human lives lost in the initial impacts and immediate aftermath. The number was staggering. In the space of a few hours, humanity had lost more than half their population. But Kethvar was focused on a different number. However, Commander, approximately 3 billion humans survived the initial impacts. They are in shelters, underground facilities, and safe zones in the southern hemisphere. 3 billion, repeated Veltar. That is far more than any of our projections suggested possible. Kethvar nodded. The evacuation was more successful than even the humans hoped. Their coordination was extraordinary. But survival of the initial impact was only the beginning. Earth's climate had been thrown into chaos. The dust clouds would cause global cooling, crop failures, and ecosystem collapse. Many of the survivors would not live to see the planet recover. Are they responding? Asked Commander Zeftos. Kethvar accessed the human communication networks. Many satellites had been destroyed, but some systems were still functioning. What he found amazed him. Yes, Commander. Emergency broadcasts are already active. They are coordinating relief efforts. The messages flowing through the damaged networks were remarkable. Instead of chaos and despair, the humans were organizing. Shelter commanders reported status and resources. Medical teams coordinated treatment for millions of injured. Engineers assessed damage to critical infrastructure. Listen to this, Kethvar said, playing an audio transmission. This is Dr. Sarah Kim at Underground Facility 7. We have 3,000 survivors. Adequate food supplies for 8 months and medical equipment is functional. We are establishing contact with nearby shelters to coordinate resource sharing. Our scientists are already working on plans for surface agriculture in the modified climate. The voice was tired but determined. These people had just watched their world end, but they were already planning how to rebuild it. Surface agriculture? Asked Veltar. In this environment? Kethavar studied more of the communications. They have been preparing for this possibility, Commander. During the evacuation, they preserved seeds, livestock genetics, and agricultural equipment. They intend to adapt their farming methods to work in the new climate. It was audacious beyond belief. The planet's surface was a toxic wasteland that would remain uninhabitable for months or years. But the humans were already planning their return. Over the next several days, as the luminous dawn maintained its observation position, the crew witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of collapsing into despair and anarchy, human civilization began to reorganize itself. Underground cities became centers of government. Scientists shared research on climate adaptation. Engineers designed new technologies for the changed world. Teachers continued educating children who would grow up on a very different planet than their parents had known. They are not just surviving, Commander Zeftos observed. They are adapting. More than adapting, Kethavar corrected. They are evolving. Look at these plans they are developing. The display showed detailed blueprints for underground agriculture systems, atmospheric processors to clean the air, and mobile habitats that could operate on the damaged surface. The humans were not waiting for their planet to recover. They were actively working to heal it. Estimated time for full planetary recovery using human intervention techniques. 47 years, the computer announced after analyzing their plans. 47 years? Veltar sounded shocked. Natural recovery would take at least 2 centuries. The humans are not waiting for natural recovery, Kethavar explained. They are engineering the recovery themselves, but what impressed him most was not their technology or their planning. It was their attitude. Despite losing half their population and most of their civilization, the humans refused to give up hope. Their communications were filled with determination to build something better from the ruins. Commander, Kethavar said slowly, I believe we need to revise our understanding of intelligent species development. How so? Kethavar gestured at the display showing Earth and its damaged but recovering civilization. The Confederation categorizes species based on their technology, their social organization, their resource management. But we have never seen a species like this. What makes them different? They do not accept limits. When faced with impossible odds, most species either flee or surrender. The humans do neither. They fight, and when fighting is not enough, they adapt. And when adaptation is not enough, they evolve. Commander Zeftos studied the data streaming from Earth's surface. Humans were already emerging from their shelters to begin cleanup operations. They worked in protective suits, clearing debris and establishing temporary settlements. Within a week of the impact, they had re-established global communications and were coordinating worldwide recovery efforts. Their courage is not just in how they face danger, Kethavar continued. It is in how they refuse to accept defeat. They lost their world, but they are building a new one. What do you recommend? Asked Commander Zeftos. Kethavar looked at the planet below, where millions of humans work to rebuild their shattered civilization. I recommend we establish formal contact, Commander. These beings have something the galaxy has never seen before, which is the ability to turn disaster into opportunity. They do not just survive extinction events, they use them to become stronger. As the luminous dawn prepared to transmit its report to the Galactic Confederation, Kethavar added a personal note to his scientific observations. He wrote about a species that faced the impossible and called it Tuesday. A species that looked at extinction and saw a chance to start over. A species that defined courage not as the absence of fear, but as the decision to keep working in spite of it. At the bottom of his report, he added a single recommendation. The Galactic Confederation should prepare for humanity to reach the stars much sooner than predicted. A species this determined will not remain on one planet for long, regardless of how damaged that planet might be. Looking at Earth's scarred but recovering surface, Kethavar smiled with an expression his species reserved for witnessing something truly magnificent. The humans had not just survived their impossible test, they had passed it with honors.